Just as we talked about in our previous video, we are different. We are all different. And so conflict is bound to happen. There's nothing, you can't avoid it. No matter how close you are bound to be different, and therefore you are bound to disagree on certain things. And misunderstanding or disagreements can get heated up. So today we're talking about how to manage conflict, how to deal with those situations so that it doesn't escalate into something more than it should be. All right, so stay tuned and we'll talk about that.
Hello and welcome back to our channel. We've been talking about how to make your relationship work, and today, of course, like we said earlier, we're dealing with conflict and how to manage it. So let's dive straight in and deal with this issue of conflict. Now, firstly, I must say here that conflict can be healthy for a relationship, but the important or the key thing is how you manage that conflict. People will always butt heads, disagreements will happen because we're different and we're complex. But at the end of the day, there has to be some form of compromise going on and all of that, so that everyone is happy, we can achieve our goals and all of that. So conflicts happen, but we just need to learn how to manage them.
So the first tip we're going to talk about is to be direct. Okay, just be direct about what the problem is, what you're unhappy about. Because what a lot of people do is to either go cold or go quiet and not talk about it at all, or they use indirect ways to show their annoyance or irritation, like talking to their partner in a condescending way, or like just pouting about, angrily moving about. Body language speaks so much, and we talked about that in communication. So all those indirect gestures doesn't allow the receiving partner, it doesn't give them a good guidance as to what to do about the situation, because all they're seeing is your negativity and your indirect communication, I should say. But it's best to just be direct. Just come out and talk about what the problem is, so that you're closer to resolving it than going down the long route where you're pouting or just showing negative body language.
And a key thing here is that the people who actually do this, have a very anti-confrontation. They are afraid of confrontation. Not that is bad in itself. There's a place for that, but at the end of the day, if you keep going around, trying to avoid being direct, addressing the issue, what you find out is you tend to have more issues stored up within yourself. You're making yourself uncomfortable, you're constantly afraid or anxious, and there might even be no need for that. You tend to escalate the situation in your mind more than it actually is. So the best way to actually deal with this, will just be direct, as much as you can. The next tip we're going to talk about is take out the blame. And in here we're advising or encouraging that you avoid using words that put the blame on your partner, because in doing so you make them, or you push them to a point where they become defensive and they shut down in conversation with you. But rather focus on how you feel, and then also focus on the behavior that has created that feeling. For example, you could be having an innocent conversation with a friend and your partner complains to you that you're flirting. So instead of saying things like you're being irrational to your partner, you could say things or use words that indicates I, and also focus on the behavior. So an example of how to address this could be, I get irritated when you claim that I am flirting with somebody when I'm actually having an innocent conversation with that person. So what you have done is, pointed out how you're feeling and pointed out how behavior or your partner's behavior and how both of them correlate. So that way you are avoiding the blame game and then you are giving her a chance to respond to how you feel.
Tip number 3 also looks at your language, all right? And the tip is never say never. And what we're saying is, don't generalize when you're talking to your partner or when you're going through a conflict. Don't use words that are generalized, like for example, you never this, that, or you always this, that. That again just puts them in a defensive mode, right? So they'll just try to explain and give you examples of when they've actually done what you're saying they don't do. Okay, so instead of using words like you never or you always, rather prompt them on the things that you want them to do. Prompt your partner on ways that they could be more attentive to you, or ways that they could be more helpful for you, than to say, oh, you're always staring at your phone, or you never help me in the kitchen, or you never this, or you always this. Rather mention what you would like them to do than to go the negative route.
Another tip is to pick your battles. Sometimes when people argue or are in a conflict, you tend to start mentioning things that have happened in the past, and you list out all the things you're not happy with. At the end of the day, you find out that those issues have not been addressed. So one good way to deal with this is that when you're having conflicts or disagreements, deal with the topic at hand. Maybe 1-2 tops, and just address them, fully explore what those issues are and how you can make things better going forward. By the time you start listing out all the other things, you'll find out that all you've just done is just had like a complaint session, and it's not healthy. Nothing has been resolved. You retire to your own corner feeling disgruntled and unsatisfied. So one way to actually deal with this is to ensure that you pick your battles one at a time.
So tip number 5 is to really listen to your partner. The most frustrating thing is to be talking to your partner and it's clear that they're not listening to you, or they interrupt you because they think that they know what you're saying or what you're about to say. But it's so important to actually listen to your partner. And when we say listen, we're talking about verbally listening and also listening to their body language as well. We advise that you use good listening techniques. So that is paraphrasing your partner, so saying back to them what you said. We talked about this when we did the communication, which was the first video in the series. So I'll link it below so you can have a look. But rephrase what they just said back to them and say, you've just said this, that, am I right? Just to make sure that you actually understand what they've just said to you. If you're going to interrupt your partner, I would say don't interrupt them when they're talking, but rather interrupt certain body languages that you might see. So you might be saying something and then you might see a reaction to them, and you could actually interrupt that and say, hold on, I think you're irritated by the comments I just made, am I right? So it shows that you're being very attentive to your partner as you're talking to them or as they are talking to you. They could be saying something to you and tears might well up in their eyes, and that could show that what they're saying is deep pain. So you could actually interrupt that and say, babe, what you've just said, I can see you tearing up, am I right? Is it really that important to you? Is it really hurting you this much? Just showing that attentiveness to listening to your partner alone will sort of quench down any anger, quench down, because your partner can see that you're really paying attention, and at that moment they are important to you and they are listening to you.
Yes. So the next tip is don't automatically object to your partner's complaints. The reason for this is that when people are criticized at any point, it's very easy to get defensive, and by being this defensive, you're looking for ways to either evade or explain away your actions or decisions. And by doing that, you're not taking on board the issues that really matter. I can even go as far as saying you're not even taking on board the feedback from your partner on where you need to make changes. An example is when a wife asks her partner to help out a little more with chores around the house, and for example asking him to probably do a quick cleanup in the morning before he rushes out to work, and the husband saying, yes, but I'll be late, or yes, but I have work to do. And the wife might also suggest, all right, why not do this at the weekend? At least there'll be a little more time. And then the husband might come up and say, yes, but at the weekends we have so and so planned out, and the weekend is always very busy. And that's the story of everybody, you know. When you keep coming with the yes but, yes but, yes but, the message you're sending to your partner is her suggestions or his suggestions are not worthwhile and should not be taken seriously. Another example is when your partner, complains that you don't help out around the house, and then you respond by cross-complaining, saying, for example, that she is a neat freak. When the complaint comes from one party, it's very important that the response should not be a counter-complaint, because what you have is a yes button kind of game. So it is very important that you hear your partner out and try to understand what he or she is clearly saying, and then you take the decision, to respond from there.
So that last point leads us nicely into the next tip, which is to take your partner's perspective. That is seeing it from their point of view. Couples that learn to take their partner's perspective are less likely to be angry during conflicts, because you're stopping yourself to look at things from your partner's perspective, to think about the situation from your partner's perspective. So that's one way to manage the conflict, to manage, the heated feelings or anything like that, just by looking at it from your partner's perspective.
Yeah, this will help you also understand how your partner feels about certain things, and then you will be able to gauge why he or she responds in that way. Tip number 8, do not show contempt for your partner. By contempt, we mean making belittling statements or start showing sarcasm to your partner. And when you do this, you then block any avenue or opportunity for having constructive conversations around the issues that are bothering you. This can also include non-verbal behavior like rolling your eyes or smirking, which can be very disrespectful and belittling, and can only go on to incite anger in your partner. An example could be your partner asking you to join in and clean up the house, and you responding, for example, that you're so tired, which is fair, but their partner responded back to you, sarcastically saying, I'm sure you're so exhausted. After all, you've been chatting with your friends all day, being on your phone, chatting and being on social media, whilst I've been working and cleaning up the house, in preparation for the king. Saying stuff like that, will, like I said earlier, will only incite anger and, shut down any avenue to have any meaningful conversation. And at the end of the day, the conflict only gets worse if not managed properly.
So the next tip is don't respond like for like. It's very easy to fall into that reciprocity where one bad remark, feeds off on another bad remark. The advice is to try and avoid that, even though a partner might be showing a bad behavior or they've said something that's disrespectful or insulting. As difficult as it can be, just try and avoid sort of responding back to that in the same way, because that can only escalate things. If you respond negatively back, that can just make the conflict worse and worse. And if you keep doing that repeatedly over a period of time, over other conflicts, the insults and the negativity only gets worse and worse, because you've chipped away on that mutual respect for each other. So with every conflict, the negativity is just getting worse and worse. So if you can practice holding back, so that you can actually drive the conversation more to actually talking about the issue, rather than exchanging like for like, tit for tat, giving as much as you get. If you can avoid that and try and steer the conversation back, rather than like tip that Paul talked about earlier on, rather focus on how you feel and their behavior. So I feel like this about this behavior, rather than you are, because if you say you are, you're giving back as much as they give to you.
And also in trying to hold back what you are displaying self-discipline, you are displaying inner strength. Those qualities are very attractive, and what you find out is when you begin to do things like that, even your partner who is wrong will begin to pick up on these things, and will find out that, you know, I can actually learn from responding positively from what my partner is doing. You know, and if you have children as well, they are also learning this you know, way of managing conflicts, and when they grow up as well, they'll be able to put this into practice.
And it could also be that, you know, your partner knows those buttons of yours to push, and they're just trying to incite certain emotions out of you. And over time, if you learn to not respond to it, then they might stop. You know,
you're taking the power back.
And exactly. And in the long run, that can then help. Help with you guys to sort of manage your conflicts a lot better, and the rows and arguments would be a lot less. So in addition to that tip, what I'll add is the research done by someone called Gottman, who talked about the 5-to-1 ratio. So that basically talks about, with every 1 negativity, try to have 5 positivity to your relationship. And what he found is relationships that could achieve that 5-to-1 ratio were less likely to get divorced or to separate or to have as much conflict in their relationship. So use that as an opportunity to review your whole relationship. How much negativity is there compared to positivity, and try and see if you can balance that ratio to a 5-to-1, where there's 5 positive to every 1 negative.
The last tip which we'll share with you is to know when it's time for a timeout. You know, sometimes the arguments can be frequent or intense. It's advisable to take a breather, just stop, go for a walk, and then come back and then revisit the issues. You know, when you do that, you think clearly, you evaluate what has gone wrong, and probably even your part in those arguments or in those issues, and then when you come back, you'll be clearer minded to address those things. So it's very important to manage or use techniques to manage the intensity or the heat within that conflict. So like take breather, even count 1 to 10, you know, before you respond. Or if it's even possible, go for a short walk or go for a short drive and then come back. By the time you get back, like I said, it will be a different atmosphere for which you can now address what needs addressing.
So that's all the tips we have for you on how to manage your conflict. I hope that you can utilize them, you know, so that you can reduce tension, and then you can get to the heart of the issues and be able to discuss them effectively. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Our next video will be on respect. So that's respect between couples. So we will see you then for that video. So hit subscribe button so you don't miss it. And if you like this video, then smash that like button
and share.
That's it. All right, so until then,
bye.